Welcome, I'm Donna Murphy, lead organizer of Braver Angels, to our Braver Angels film discussion of My Octopus Teacher. The mission of Braver Angels is that we bring Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. So today, I'm going to go over our agenda and we'll head right into it. First of all, we're going to be a smaller group today, so we are not going to break into breakout rooms. We'll just all discuss together right here in the big room. And we are going to start with Melanie Banks. She'll be talking to us about the making of My Octopus Teacher. I mean, really, what an amazing feat that was. So then we're going to start with discussion questions. Now, of course, there's lots of ways that people could discuss this movie. If you were a photographer, you'd be talking maybe about the underwater cinematography. If you were an environmentalist, you'd be talking about climate change, about this particular kelp forest. But we're Braver Angels, and so we're going to talk about what this film teaches us about how two very different beings can get along. Time permitting, then, after we go through our discussion questions, we'll open it up to other questions and themes proposed by the attendees. And one thing I should mention is that our new head of digital programming would like to maybe write a blog about this. She'll watch the recording of it. So if there's anybody who would not want to be quoted in our online blog, let us know in the chat, okay? So now, we're going to go ahead and get started with the making of the My Octopus Teacher. So I'm going to go ahead and share a screen, and then we will ask Melanie to unmute herself, and here we go.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I am vacationing and I am not at my home. So in order for me to do this part, I'm not able to have my video on, but I am actually here. So I really enjoyed My Octopus Teacher, and there was a request made by Donna, and I offered to do just a little background information about some of the filming parts of this unbelievable movie, or I guess it's a documentary. So this first film slide is just maybe something you remember seeing. It is a documentary by Netflix. Our main character, of course, is Craig Foster, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Craig, and let's see, we can go to the next slide, the next part, Donna. Okay, so I do have a lot of information. It's not that I'm a geek, it's just that there was a lot of information that I thought was really super to just find out. So Craig, like I said, is the main photographer, and as he mentions it in the movie that he had a crisis in 2011. So in my research, I found out that Craig had finished 3 arduous nature documentaries in a row. So, and interestingly enough, he worked with a fellow, Roger Horrocks, who we will see in just a little bit in a different version. And he also, in an interview, recognized that Craig was suffering from a burnout. I also listened to a interview with his wife, Swati, and Swati remembers Craig as irritable and impatient. I think he was just suffering from depression. Not that anybody really said that, but it's he was burned out. So he, I think an important part that he mentions in the documentary is that his son Tom, he knew he was missing out on a connection with his son. And that was, to my best ability, as far as piecing the timeline together, I think Tom is about 11 years old in 2011. So this is all happening now at 2011. Craig decides to start diving without a wetsuit or an oxygen tank and begins to explore the underwater kelp forest. And in the information, it's pretty well stated that he's doing that in order to get some self-healing started by connecting with nature. And it's just, there's just a big connection to this kelp forest. So one of the next slide or part of the presentation, Donna, takes us to one of the questions I wanted to ask is, where exactly is this kelp forest? So if we could go to the next slide. So my question to myself, and I thought I'd share it with you, is where in the world did Craig do this diving? And it's actually in False Bay, which is located maybe in an area that we would be familiar with, and that's Cape Town, South Africa. So the body of water that Craig is swimming in is exposed to the cold currents of the Atlantic Ocean, of the Benguela area. And then further exploration shows that False Bay lies between mountainous Cape Peninsula and the Hottentots Holland Mountains. So this water is very cold. In fact, I found out that there is only 1 month that is considered swimming season for the average person. Now, the next question I wanted to find out was, no one ever mentioned how cold the water was. So in my investigation, I found out that the average water degree for that area is 57 degrees. And in, again, I kept digging and kept asking questions. And so 57 degrees is considered very dangerous as far as the level of water for exposure for the body. In fact, one source said it's threatening, dangerous, and possibly life-threatening. So Craig faced this temperature on an average. Maybe it was warmer on some days and colder on the others. But the other part that we want to also remember is that it's not a swimming pool. He had to go in. He decided to go in no matter what was going on. And we even saw how on some days he chose to go in when it was turbulent. So that was, I think that's kind of an interesting item to remember. I also wanted to know, what exactly is free diving? So mainly it is no barrier between Craig, the kelp forest, and everything that swims within the kelp forest. So I think that is a barrier that, you know, you have to really think about. He was rubbing up against everything that is down there. The other amazing item about Craig is that he is able to hold his breath for 6 minutes. And as we know, without a supply of oxygen, the body begins to shut down. So that, I mean, in this filming, we can just kind of realize that the guy could only go down. First of all, he had to go down. So that's part of his 6 minutes. And then he had to stay down, and, you know, as long as his lungs could sustain him. And again, I asked, well, what's an average person? Well, I'm a shallow breather, so I would have to go into a lot of training in order to be able to even exist in this condition, a lot of training. And both Craig and, in a moment, Pippa, I'm going to mention her, they both said that they did training in order to achieve this feat. So an average person can hold their breath for about 30 seconds. Now you can even time yourself in your own home if you wanted to. But I also thought it was interesting that even those doing underwater emergencies, people in that realm can only, you know, maybe an average is about 2 minutes that they can hold their breath. So the other diver, so we've talked about Craig, And now the other diver that's interesting about this other diver is that her name is Pippa Ehrlich. She's also a free diver. So out of the 3 people, she chose to do the her part of the filming as a free diver. And she says that she can sustain her breath underwater for 4 minutes. So with this, just think about free diving means that you are free. Think of all the fears that you've had to go through in order to like break through these own emotional and mental barriers in order to actually do this free diving. So by the time that you're free diving, you're relaxed, your mind is relaxed, your body is relaxed. That means that you're open and you're calm and you're confident. Yeah, and I also mentioned that, you know, whenever a diver is down there, when you dive, you're not diving in a swimming pool. You have to take what is actually given to you. So you have to stay present. So on the next slide, I'm going to introduce you to who the divers are. So we've mentioned Craig Foster. We saw him quite a lot in the documentary. We don't see anybody else, and that was purposeful. So the woman, Pippa Ehrlich, is the one that's taking shots. We can kind of see how some of the shots are done for Craig. And then the other photographer is the friend and co-photographer that had also been on several other documentaries with Craig, is Roger Horrocks. And it was pretty cool to find out that as a young man, he's probably in his mid-40s now, but he had trained with some of Jacques Cousteau's underwater photographers. And at that time, he was just being a gopher. So, but now he is the one doing underwater photography. Now, I've mentioned Tom. Tom is, again, he's part of the story of connection. There's a lot of storyline on connection with my octopus teacher. And I mentioned that he was around 11. I didn't read anything that absolutely, I could tell you for sure he was 11, but it was right around that time, as best as my information could give me. But now during the 10 years, so Tom started having his crisis in 2011. He just started going into the water for his own self-healing. And then during a 10-year period is when he began collecting enough information and enough photography to consider. At one time, he thought he was just doing a kelp forest documentary. But that's 10 years of this young kid's life. And he's, by the end of the project, he's now into his 20s. Tom, as a youngster, then began doing, he was part of the photography. He did some of the drone aerial shots. And this is just another side note that I found out, that he also was part of the documentary's music. He did some specialty parts, not the entire music score. So kind of wrapping it up, the next slide. So I won't go through in each word, but what I wanted to do was try and understand the timeline. So I mentioned 2011 is when Craig had his professional crisis time. So he swam and did his own research, kind of just a hobby, until about 2016. By that time, he began to become more creative and get more inspired. He if you remember in the documentary, he had a bulletin board and he was beginning to make connections with different things, with different creatures down in the kelp forest. In fact, he got to a point, it's known that a phrase was citizen scientist, and he started working with the marine biology department at the University of Cape Town. So he begins taking all of these great photographs and starts sharing with his wife and with Tom, his son, and friends, and just starts getting enthused again, connected back with life. And so that around 2017, Craig contacts his friend and camera operator, Roger Horrocks. And they decide, you know, there might be a real story here. And the story, again, at first, is doing a sequel for BBC's Blue Planet 2. So it was not anything about the octopus at all. 2017, again, it's from what I can piece together. It's about this time, something happens and it shifts when Craig begins having this interactions with the octopus. And that's when decisions begin to start shifting to include the kelp forest, but to begin documenting this connection that he is coming in contact with the octopus. Pippa Ehrlich is a marine conservation journalist, and they also describe her as a storyteller. She came on board in order to help keep things in focus, because as you could probably imagine, there is so much going on within that kelp forest and even around itself in the in Cape Town area, that it was almost hard for them to stay focused on what the storyline was going to be. And Craig credits Pippa for keeping things on track. And I think it's also something to remember that Craig and Pippa could only stay underwater for 4 to 6 minutes at a time, whereas Roger was able to stay as long as his oxygen tank would let him. So they had lots and lots of footage to go through in order to even create this documentary. So just to wrap it up, I wanted to mention the next slide that there was a small crew that put this story together. Netflix had to bring somebody in. They brought in some environmentalists. I'm not even sure, I didn't make a list of who all was involved, but it was very, very apparent that each person that was brought into My Octopus Teacher, it grew from something little, and then it became dynamic and evolving into this beautiful and moving story that we are now able to experience with Craig. And quite frankly, I can tell you that there was enough information on the internet that there were people like you and I that was wondering, did this really happen? And it did. And it is as charming and beautifully documented. And I mean, we really got to see something special. And the last slide is for the presentation, is that I can tell you by the humble responses that these filmmakers shared during the time that the interviews that I listened to, is that they would be absolutely honored to think that this film was used for a Braver Angels discussion tonight. They have had so many awards, so many nominations for this documentary. They all appreciate that, but this film changed each one of those people's lives. And for that to have this spark conversation and change is exactly what we're doing in Braver Angels. So thank you very much for allowing me to do this, Donna. And I'm sorry that this internet was, the broadband was low, and I hope the presentation went over nicely. So I'll turn it back to you.
Yes, it was wonderful, Melanie. Thank you so much. You can see our jazz hand applause for the amazing research that you did to share that information and help bring the making of my Octopus Teacher come alive. Would you be willing to answer one or two questions, or should we move on? It's up to you, Melanie.
Oh, no, if I can, that'd be great. And I'm gonna keep, I'm sorry I can't have my face on, but it messes with my connection. So I apologize for that, but.
Okay, well, there's so few of us. You can raise your hand physically, we'll see it, or you can also raise your hand using the raise hand function, which it depends on what version of Zoom you have. It might be at the bottom of your screen. It might be under emojis at this point. You might find your raise hand, or you can just physically raise your hand if anybody has any questions for Melanie. And Dorsey Cartwright does. Dorsey, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Actually, I don't have a question, Melanie, but I just want to tell you that I appreciate so much all that you shared with us, because I watched the movie last night, and so many things that I wondered about, you told and showed us. So just thank you. Oh, I do have a question now.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah,
I do have a
sure.
question. So you said that you indicated that the people who made this would be especially meaningful that we were using this in Braver Angels. Can you say more about in what way, why they would be?
Oh, yeah. I think the word humbled, humility, each person that, okay, and it's his wife, Pippa, Craig himself, they just see this as such a amazing experience, so moving. In fact, Craig has started a society, and I don't have my notes, I don't know what it's called, but his work is going to continue on with sea change, I think is what it's called. So they would the way that they answered, the questions that were given to them, they were just honored by the presence of having this experience and watching Craig and watching his change. And quite frankly, I can tell you, I saw an interview with Craig in about 2011, and he was so disengaged with the interviewer. It was a really it was very good that I saw this. He was like he was in a freezer. He answered the question. I can almost understand why his wife said that he was impatient, but you could see it in his eyes. And by the time when we see him experience this through the 2017 and 2018 experience, he is a very changed man. And you can see it in his face and his demeanor. And I do believe that this is part of what we're here talking about, is that when we are when we have conversation with somebody that turns into ice because they don't believe or disagree with what we have to say, I recognize that person that Craig was in some of the people that I talked to. It happens to us, we break down, and nature is so important for us to get back in touch with nature. And this is such a beautiful movie to do that with. So thanks, Dorsey, for that question. I kind of went on a little bit more than I probably should have, but
Well, thanks.
It's moving. It's very moving.
Very.
Thank you, Melanie. One more question. And if not, we'll move on. But any more questions for Melanie at the moment? Okay. Oh, Molly, what I'd like to do at this point is also introduce my co-moderator, Molly Zeff, who has joined us now. And Molly, maybe you can ask the last 4 questions. And I'll start out with the questions, but welcome, Molly. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, number 1, both human and octopus start their relationship by overcoming their fear of each other and gaining each other's trust. I mean, let's face it, we humans, we eat octopus, right? We think of them as restaurant items, or we're scared of them. They're monsters, sea monsters, right? And for the octopus's part, here's this really odd creature with a camera. At one point, the camera falls to the ocean floor and just scares the bejesus out of that poor octopus, and she skitters away, and it takes them a long time to find where the octopus has gone and hidden herself to. But eventually they do grow to trust each other. The beautiful scene where the octopus is kind of holding his body, just lovely, right? So my question then is, how can people who are different overcome their fear of each other and gain each other's trust? Have you attended any Braver Angels workshops or debates that helped do this? I mean, if a man and octopus can do it, how can we do it with people who are different than us? Christine? Unmute yourself.
I did. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had a really profound, maybe profound thought just while we were talking. One of the themes that I saw in that film was that the octopus eventually dies because she is giving birth to her children. And I thought that one of the things I think that really links a lot of our divisions, and I think a lot of our feelings about what we feel about where America's going, is a fear for our children. And I think that this is where why the divisions are so powerful. I think that everybody is afraid of the world their children will inherit. And that's where some of the venom and passion comes from in our defenses of our position. Does that make any sense?
It does, but how can we overcome that fear then?
That's a good question. Well, this is a horrible thought, but I thought about who the shark could be, but I don't want to say it yet. But what happened to my, oh, there I am. How do we get over that? Is by talking about what really matters to us, I think. You know, what do we fear about the world our children are going to inherit? How do we all feel about that world? You see, like if you're on the blue side, you worry more about global warming. I think if you're on the red side, you worry about other peoples taking over your jobs, whether it be immigrants or whatever. I think that there are many other differences between that's just one example for each. But I think that our fear of our children and how, so maybe we need to talk about this more. Like a question might be for a discussion group might be like, what are you afraid of that will happen in the next 20 years, 30 years?
Okay, we've got a few other raised hands in terms of how can we overcome fear of each other and gain each other's trust. Dorsey, you're next. You have to unmute yourself.
Well, first, let me say I really support what Christine is saying, and I know my concern for my grandson is a big driver in what I'm doing. But my thought was, when you brought up the speculation, Donna, is that I have had my second session with my new partner in the Walk a Mile in My News. And I was thinking how in the beginning with, is it Chris, the man, what was his name?
Craig.
Craig. Yeah, Craig and the octopus, how tentative, how they just would kind of reach out, and how the octopus would pull back, or then Craig said he wanted to pull back, but he stopped himself. I mean, it was in the beginning, it was a little bit of curiosity and getting to know, but tentative. And what my new red friend and I, our first meeting, we just talked about ourselves. And then today, having shared our take on various issues via email articles, we did discuss some of those things. But even before we started discussing, we had some chit chat and a little warming up and creating like a little nest before we took on the more difficult things. So that's kind of what I see with Braver Angels. It gives a safe way for us to begin to interact and get to know one another.
Mhm. And Dorsey, can you please explain for people who don't know what is Walk a Mile in My News?
Oh, this is so cool. This is something new. It was created by a woman, maybe in Washington, the state of Washington. But it's a new program, Braver Angels, where you share your reading material with somebody from another side. You each share what things you're reading about various issues, and then you get together one-on-one and you discuss it with each other.
Mhm.
You know, again, not trying to change minds, but just trying to create more understanding.
Mhm. Very good. Okay, thank you. Melanie, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. I love Dorsey's mention about curiosity. That's what came to me very loud and clear, is that Craig initiated the curiosity. I mean, first he recognized the octopus and then became even more observant. He was quiet and observant and would come back with intention. And I think one of the things that he noticed is that she was different. It was different. And when we stop realizing that we are special and that the person in front of us is special, if all of a sudden everybody is just super common, then we're missing out on the fact that we're all so cool. And we're as cool and different, and we are much more than just a political stature. So Dorsey explained that, you know, there's other things to us that we can accept and understand and learn. And when that doesn't happen, then all of a sudden we just become us against them. So that's what I thought the movie showed me.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Okay, Colleen, you up next?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just going to make a very small point. I totally, I think everybody's pointed out really important things about overcoming fear and finding curiosity and interest in each other. But also I felt that Craig, he really had to put himself into a different, he had to put himself way outside of his comfort zone to even get the opportunity to have this experience. And like literally like physical training and weather and cold and risking his life, but he, without him going through that willingness to make himself uncomfortable and that willingness to try and grow, he would have never had the chance to have the experience that he did. And I just think that says a lot for, you know, as we want to connect with people, like what are we doing to give ourselves opportunities to connect?
Okay, got it, Colleen. Okay, Margaret, how about you?
Colleen, I really like what you just said, that really resonated, but I also thought about how he immersed himself in this environment. He even speaks about that, immersing himself and taking away all the barriers, no wetsuit, no, nothing to come between he and his skin and this environment that he's getting into, this foreign environment where he is kind of an outsider. But he becomes an insider by putting himself into that, right? By immersing himself, by going day after day, by showing up. Somebody said 80% of life is just showing up. He did. He showed up every day. He's kept the barriers away. And because of that, he got the opportunity to actually get to know this somewhat alien creature in a way that was very close and touching. And I think we could all do that same thing with others.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you guys are, let's see, I'm going to continue on now with some more questions. Everybody will get a chance to talk, I promise. You guys are kind of blowing through the questions that I'd lined up. I had one question about the importance of curiosity in bridging divides, and you got it. It's really important, right? You talked about that. And then here's another one that you have certainly started talking about. And so we'll continue on with it. The narrator, Craig, mentions going into the kelp forest, not an octopus's garden. Okay, it's a kelp forest, without the barrier of a wetsuit and scuba gear. He tries to impose as few foreign objects as possible on the octopus to respond to that. So what if we went into political spaces of people who hold views different than ours without barriers or an object? What would that involve doing? And Melissa, you've got your hand up now. Would you be willing to crack on that? At that?
Sure. If we went into without the barriers, can I just first say the thing that was on my mind? I'll just get it off my chest and then I'll come back to that, which is, I'm sorry to say I haven't watched the whole film yet, but I dipped into some different parts of it. And what the heck? Octopuses can walk on their legs? And so to me, that was like, I'm like, my mind is blown, like it just sort of changes the shape shifting and it's changed my mind is blown. The world is something I didn't even know it was. And to me, that's kind of a lesson. Someone kind of alluded to it, but like once we open ourselves up to meeting other people, like they're fantastical creatures. And it's fun. And it was just like, it was really fun to witness that. So I don't know, I think going into political situations with our walls down, it can be scary because we don't know if we're going to get attacked or not. But I think I don't know, it's sort of like picking your battles, like knowing if the water could be so cold you're going to get hypothermia and die. Like you just sort of have to know when too much is too much, but sort of picking the right, getting our sea legs, I guess, to get attuned to understanding when the water is right enough. And when it's a friendly octopus and not like a deadly nettle or something. So
yeah, very good point. And also where we draw barriers. Do we do it online, in a chat, someplace on Facebook, or do we do it someplace else? Okay, why not? You've got your hand up. You want to take a stab at this too?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I was part of the beginning of Walk a Mile in My News, so I see familiar names on here that I haven't yet met in person or even in video form. So hello, everyone. In that context, this documentary was very timely for me, as in the Walk a Mile in My News experience, Braver Angels pair us up with a red or blue partner as a counterpart pairing to exchange information and news items and things. And I just wanted to give an example of my buddy. He's on the call tonight, but I won't identify him unless he volunteers himself. But he swam way out into the kelp forest today, and as an example of the octopus, my teacher, experience in real life. I'm a pro-life conservative red and a very tiny dot in the blue state of California. And my Braver Angels, Walk a Mile in My News buddy today, joined me today on the public sidewalk in front of an abortion clinic where I've spent the last 17 years praying and helping and ministering to women with a pregnant ? Need help ? Ministry, where I meet women where they are and assist them with whatever resources they need in order to choose life for their baby. My blue Walk a Mile in My News Braver Angels buddy, has been a lifetime pro-choice person of that position on the subject. And so, although we've been talking and getting to know each other, much like the man in the documentary, he got to observe her in her environment. Some things that stood out to me in the movie is that, let's see, the closer he got to her, the more he realized that they have in common. Something about the creature that is unusual, but there's something to learn here, something special. There was a curiosity that drew him to her. And then there was a point where he acknowledged that, okay, I trust you, coming from the octopus's perspective. You can come into my world. And I just want to add that example today, that my Braver Angels Walk a Mile in My News buddy came into my world. And I just encourage others on this call to make that same effort. And as the recipient of that grace-filled gift, I just want to say thank you to my Braver Angels buddy who's on the call tonight for coming out into the deep, into the kelp forest with me today. It meant a lot.
Wow. And he came there, he'd already earned your trust, it sounds like. Before he came, the mutual trust, so that when he showed up, you weren't afraid that he was going to start yelling at you. You knew you knew, even though he maybe didn't agree with you, that he could be in your space respectfully.
Right.
Share that space with you.
Another quote from the documentary, it was, "What happened to her also happened to me." And, watching her death and her vulnerability really touched the man there. And another thing he said was that she was teaching me to be sensitive to, quote, the other. And in our polarized country, the other, of course, is along the political spectrum, but still they enjoyed each other's company. And that's what I've learned to do through Braver Angels, despite our political spectrum polarization.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So going along with this is kind of part 2 of this question. And in a sense, your partner has shown an example. When one does feel a barrier, what's the work that you are doing or aspiring to do to remove that barrier? And feel free to mention Braver Angels workshops and debates. How do you remove that barrier? Maybe you don't want to remove the barrier. Okay, we have Melanie again, but anybody else who hasn't spoken yet would like to say something. Aha, okay, Melanie, they want to hear you talk again. Go ahead.
Well, I'm only talking because I so enjoy Braver Angels in this experience, and I see the parallels that you're trying to make with the movie. In my own life, I have recognized that when I am in a conversation with someone that I am in opposition with, I am more mindful. I want, it is not for me anymore to try and teach the person across the table. It's my desire, because of coming to Braver Angels and listening to different opportunities. I can't tell you exactly which one I would say that spoke to me, but it's the accumulation of what Braver Angels is trying to do, is is to remain connected to humanity, to remain connected to the point that the person across the table for me has a different opinion, and to not be triggered with the fact that they are going to hurt me. That doesn't mean, just because they have a different opinion, doesn't mean that they are a lesser person. And I must keep that that idea in my head so that the polarization gets neutralized, and I can say, well, thank you for letting me hear what you're thinking about. I didn't know that you thought that way, and then drop it. You know, it's just learning about what is going on in each other's minds. So that's what I wanted to say about that.
Okay, thank you. Vera Sandronsky, you've written something very profound in the chat box, starting with, I wonder, would you be willing to unmute yourself and tell us what you said there, Vera? Vera, can you, there you go.
Sure. I'm sorry. Yeah, I've been sort of in transit. So, right. So yeah, I was wondering if, you know, one way to look at it is the first goal really removing the barrier, or what is the barrier? To me, the first step is trying to understand what creates the difference, what motivates the values are, and then, you know, then you see how it sits with you and you're in it. But I misunderstood a previous comment, but to me, the way I would sort of frame it is that it's first a step towards understanding, because we're still going to have differences. And so it's how you hold it and how it affects what you can learn in the relationship through the conversation about that. So that's just what I wanted to share.
Okay. And how you phrased it here in the chat box, it's about first trying to understand what created the barrier in the first place. Yeah. And
by the way, I did put in Wynette asked me to put in a link to the reunion this Thursday that Sacramento Alliance has scheduled. So I hope that worked the way I put it in the chat box. That takes you to a page with a few events, but you can scroll down to the Thursday event.
Yeah, so go ahead and click on that, folks, if you want to maintain that link even after we are done today. Okay, and Dorsey, you have something to say?
Yes, I seem to have a lot to say tonight. But you know, you were talking about how do you let the walls down, and for me, it's kind of similar to what the others said. What I realized when you asked that is, I know before, like my new red friend, as well as on other Braver Angels events, I can feel at times myself feeling kind of self-protective about, I'm going to get triggered, I'm going to hear things, etc., and kind of feeling defensive. And so what I'm doing right now to try and bring those walls down has a lot to do with my self-talk to myself about, similar to what others have said, that this is not about me proving anything or changing other people's minds. It's just about better understanding what others think and why, and doing my best to give voice to what I think and why.
Okay.
And I can notice the difference inside when I shift that way. I relax.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dorsey. Okay, I'm going to just pose a thought question that nobody needs to answer right now, and then I'm going to hand it over to Molly for the next question to answer. So here's another way of getting at the same question, but going a bit deeper. The octopus performs an incredible act of self-sacrifice, as was mentioned. She literally allows herself to die in order for the octopus species to survive. how might we ensure the survival of democracy in America? Is there anything you might be willing to sacrifice? Thought question. If you want then democracy to survive, what would you sacrifice? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Molly Zeff for the next question.
Awesome. The next two questions are really about the kind of environment Craig was putting himself in and how we can find parallels in our own, bridge building work, as I like to frame it. So basically when Craig, plunges into the forest literally each day, he's entering her environment, respecting her environment. And other than one occasion when she comes up on land because she's fleeing the shark, he's really in the octopus's kelp forest. So in entering places and thinking about how to break down barriers, it's really important to surround ourselves with people very different from us. And so these two questions are related to the following one. So I think I'm gonna take one answer for this and then give the next question and see if people want to tie them together at all, since they're very related. So first of all, what are some quote red environments, and interpret that however you will, but environments with people very different from you that folks who lean blue could visit in order to better connect with conservatives, and vice versa? What are some quote blue environments where you'll find mostly people leaning to the left that Reds might visit in order to better connect with liberals? So just kind of almost brainstorming together. Feel free to mention actual environments you've entered, and I'm gonna broaden it a little and say if there are just environments you've entered that are mostly people completely different from you in other respects as well, besides the political sense, what are some ways that you kind of felt yourself grow as a result of that? So kind of Braver Angels window is very much like, what are other environments, that are quote red or blue where you could enter where people are not like you, and then the broader one is just environments in general where people are very different from you that you have entered and could perhaps take some of those lessons into these quote red and blue environments.
And Molly, I just want to add that we did have one example already where a blue person went to a protest outside an abortion clinic, which would be a red environment. And also just to interject that we will go until at least 9:15 tonight. We'll let you decide how long you want to stay, but we'll keep going for a while. So please stick with us as long as you'd like to. Back to you, Molly.
Awesome. So, and I know this is not an easy question. I'm not seeing hands raised. I'm going to say that taking the broader perspective, in college, I had to write about an environment that was just, different from my norm, but still on campus. So I went to the Black church on campus, and I'm a religious Jew, and obviously, and maybe it's not obvious, but I'm a white person. And for the first time, I think it wasn't a specifically conservative or liberal environment, but it was the first time I was, not just going to like a church for like a confirmation of a friend, which happened many years ago, or I think one time a wedding, but really surrounded myself intentionally with people who had completely different religious beliefs than me, and were also a different, racial or skin color background. So, and I would say I gained a deep appreciation for a way of expressing religiosity that I had not seen before. And that in some ways, I think that, some of my own communities could learn a lot and benefit from seeing. So that's one example of many we could give. Donna, I see you have a hand raised, so go for it. You're muted. Standard 2021.
Exactly. So an example of a red environment, I've never been, but I've heard it, and I thought, well, gosh, maybe I should. It's attending a NASCAR race. Okay. How many blue folks have been to a NASCAR race? And then on the other hand, in terms of a blue environment, I'm a blue, and my Unitarian Universalist church is probably about 99% blue. It's very social justice related, right? So if a red wanted to go to a blue environment, I can recommend a Unitarian Universalist service.
Any others? This is not an easy one. I would say like church ones to piggyback on down a little bit. I was pretty young and not really politically aware at the time, but my best friend of many years was a Southern Baptist, which is, as people may know, a very, by and large, conservative denomination. And she actually took me to like a Christian concert, like a Christian rock concert in a rural area in Missouri, where we're both from, St. Louis. And that's also kind of just a different learning experience. I guess, yeah, religious institutions are a sort of obvious one. If anyone has ever been to a political rally for a group not your own, that would be fascinating. I can just say point blank that I never have and had never really thought of it before this moment, but it would be a really interesting experience to see, you know, what's bringing people, what are they excited about, why are people coming?
Well, what about vaccinations? That's become, unfortunately, a political issue here. When you have somebody say, I'm going to think about it, you can assume they may be Republican and red, which is kind of weird, but that seems to be true, doesn't it? And so how do you deal with that? And I mean, I have people in my own family who have not been vaccinated yet, like my sister, who says, I will think about it. And I know she's listening to a lot of conspiracy theories about strange things with the vaccine, and that's why she's not doing it.
Well, so I'd say if we're talking about visiting environments, then that environment would be to go to some conspiracy theory websites and start reading, right?
Yeah, I mean, she's given me names of people, and I told her I'll check into it, and I've looked them up, and I've, you know, she doesn't have the internet, so I will like make copies of everything I find and give it to her, and this is what I found. You know, and sometimes that changes their mind, but then she'll listen to the next one, and it goes on and on. And you know, the result of it is that she's still not vaccinated.
Yeah.
And she'll say, like, you might bring the variants home to me. And I said, well, get vaccinated. And I just don't know what else to do at this point. I think it's very bizarre that that's a political issue now. Because I mean, anti-vaxxers have been with us for quite a long time. It never was a political issue. Trump got vaccinated, so I don't really understand it, to be honest with you. Why? But I think it's seated in a lot of conspiracy theories that people hear on social media, that different social media sources that, and this is the other thing that's interesting, if you're on one side or the other, red versus blue, you're listening to totally different information.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's why that importance of that group is that someone mentioned Walk a Mile My News is so obvious. Wynette, I see your hand raised as well. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, you know, I don't want to turn my teacher, the octopus discussion into one about vaccinations, but just in listening to my Braver Angels counterparts describe vaccination hesitation as obviously must be based upon conspiracy theories, and it's bizarre. And I just would encourage each of us on the call to back up just a little bit. Let's practice the octopus, my teacher, and not presume such negativity towards people that may have vaccination hesitancy. There are very, you know, I don't want to turn that into a discussion, but there are emergency room doctors, very well-respected researchers who also have hesitancy and have not been vaccinated. And so I just want to share that so that there's greater respect and understanding allowed in the discussion, especially with family members. It's just such a personal issue.
Luke, I saw you were, I'm going to say Luke, Rebecca, and then Colleen.
Molly, I just wanted to respond directly about the question of going to political protests on the other side. So I live in the area around Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, a couple, about 25 miles south of the Beltway and 40 miles south of the city. So I'm in D.C. quite a bit. And I'm red. I'm conservative. I'm also a kind of cloistered, useless intellectual kind of conservative, right? So I generally don't go to protests to join them. And I am not usually a protester or kind of thinker on much of my thought, right? But I've developed a bad habit over the last 5 or 6 years of going to every protest just to walk around and look around, just because, it's there are a couple reasons. One of them is that they're never covered very well at all in any media at all. I'd assume there's some good kind of investigative reporting by people both sympathetic and critical of them. But I think like in terms of what filters into press coverage, there's not really a lot of good stuff. So it's always just interesting to see the very real human and the very real just down to earth people there to partly express their views and also partly to socialize kind of thing, right? And I find I've been to probably dozens in DC over the last 5 years, from all over the political spectrum, and a lot of which were kind of weird in terms of the ideas being proposed. But that being said, it's just interesting to observe that as a thing, and so I don't know if I would necessarily analogize that to octopus level discomfort, right? But I think it can be a really valuable thing to go to observe social movements and protests just for the sake of thinking about your fellow Americans, even if you don't necessarily have the intention of engaging them at the protest or engaging in thought on the particular issues there, just to observe people doing what Americans do, so.
I think that's a fantastic answer. It had never occurred to me to go to a protest of another group different from mine, my own views. So thank you. And Rebecca, and then Colleen.
I was just going to say that I had read an article lately that talked about the algorithms that the computer people use. And I don't understand this very well, but in talking with my sister, who is on the other side of the political spectrum, I realized when I was talking with her this last week, I was mostly listening, which was the best thing for me to do at the time, because what she was saying was so opposite of everything that I had heard on the news. And it just shocked me how totally different. And the algorithms are set up so that whatever your interest might be, it figures it out and starts sending only the things that you want to see and read and that sort of thing. And the other people who have a different view are getting a totally different kind of experience. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Rebecca, I just wanted to mention that that's social media that does that. And that's personally why I'm not on it anymore. And other people, newspapers, they're biased in newspapers, and you may choose and you may read between, but they don't use those kinds of, it's printed. But you're right about that. That is a scary part about social media.
Yeah. Thank you.
And Colleen, and then Joe, and then actually we're going to switch to the last couple questions here for the end of it. So go for it, Colleen.
I was just going to, so one way that you can put yourself into another environment, and sorry, I don't know if you can see them running back and forth, but they're making all the noise. Travel, just like we travel to experience different cultures and different parts of the world, and be in a place where we're different culturally. You can actually do that inside the United States, and sometimes even in your own state. You can pick, let's go spend 3 nights in a red or a blue location. You're staying at a resort, you're going to come across lots of people at breakfast or by the pool, and
It's a little bit of a privilege thing, obviously, but it is a way that you can have exposure to different people. Very, very different people.
You were saying breakfast where again?
Like, so I just did this weekend, you go to a resort or a hotel, and you go to the breakfast, hour, and you're sitting there in a group, everybody's around you, just chit chatting. Did you see that? Did you see that? And then you can start talking to people, who you necessarily wouldn't have breakfast with otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, you're traveling and, in Italy, or you're traveling in Mexico, it's the same thing. You're just talking to different people. And we can do that locally.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And last, before we switch gears here, Joe, go for it.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to mention is I think I would approach people very differently if I went to a rally for a candidate of the opposite party, compared to if I were with 2 or 3 people who have different political views. In the first case, I think I just do a lot of listening, because I think it's dangerous to start conversations like that in a large group, where people tend to they come together to almost protect each other, like a mobbish thing. I've found that on Facebook. When someone when my dear friend makes a comment, my dear friend who's kind of changed politically since she's moved to a very conservative state, when she says things that kind of surprise me because they don't sound like my friend, I have found that's not a good place to start to make comments when there are a lot of people on the same call, you might say, because they will tend to come to each other's defense, and it becomes more of it's not a good conversation. It's just not a good conversation. So I don't shy away from a large group that has different opinion from myself, but I wouldn't really want to enter in too much of a conversation, rather just be an observer, as Luke pointed out.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, healthy caveat. I would say another way is you find someone you trust and you exchange information, and then you can always meet up later too. Is another way to do, like, go to a public restaurant or whatever, a setting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna dive deep here in our last few minutes. That's probably be our last question, actually, just for time's sake. So we talked about removing barriers and how to remove them and what that would look like, and we talked about how to go into spaces, like where to find some places that we could go into, houses of worship, protests, political rallies, even a restaurant on vacation. So the deeper level is then, what do you do when you're actually engaging in dialogue? So zooming out to Octopus's garden and storytelling. The next question is about stories. So when you're really engaging in someone, to me, it's like so much about getting to know their story and where their views came from on a very personal level. So Craig, in some ways, gets to know his Octopus's teacher's story and has that sense of, what her struggles are and how she plays, and that actually brings back the idea of, like, we all, many millions of Americans, not all Americans, but many millions of Americans do have children or want to have children or have grown children. How you play with your kids, how you play with your friends. And we learn that what helps him build that deep emotional connection is just kind of observing her day-to-day life and seeing even her pain, right? So this is, like, I hate to end with the last 5 minutes on this, but something to leave us to think about as well is, what are ways that we can learn each other's stories, either just more broadly or the stories that drive our political views. Not like there's always a story behind, like, the statistics we cite in the news review. There's a reason we're drawn to those particular news stories or those particular, demographic statistics we're citing. So I'm going to send this along. What are ways that you've learned someone's stories or could learn someone's stories of people with an opposite view of yours? What's a way that you've dived deep? So I'm basically saying, inspire us. Tell us a way that you've done this, and whether in a Braver Angels context or not. Outside of that. Oh, wow, awesome. Okay, Donna, go for it, and then Joe again. Or Donna and then Margaret, actually, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to suggest 2 Braver Angels offerings. The first is the Red Blue workshop, where it has the even number of reds, even number of blues. And that is a way of establishing trust between folks. It's 4 structured conversations, if you will, or structured exercises that help you go deeper and deeper into hearing each other and hearing their stories. That I'll say that as a generality, get to a Red Blue workshop. And then also something more one-to-one. We have one-to-one conversations in Braver Angels. Okay, I'm biased, I'm in charge of them, but they're really wonderful. They come in 4 flavors right now. It's a red-blue conversation, 1 red person, 1 blue person, rural-urban, a conversation across generations, and a conversation about race, ethnicity, and culture. And they give you the opportunity to really hear somebody's story. So for example, in a conversation about race, my partner was African-American, a minister, and he shared a story with me about how when he was a child, the car he was traveling in, his father driving, and then he was in the back seat with his mom and the other kids. Police pulled over the car, and he remembers how frightened he felt and how frightened he felt his dad was, his African-American father was, when the police officer pulled him over. And I could hear it was something very emotional for him that brought up something painful from the past. So I appreciated he shared that story with me, and I shared stories with him, maybe happier stories about my Italian American background. But if you're talking one-to-one person using a Braver Angels conversation guide, it helps direct you in terms of sharing those stories.
Awesome. And I'm going to say Margaret, Joe, and Wynette, and try to each, because we're at 9:15, try to each take 45 seconds, a minute at most, just so we can have all 3 of you get to share. Margaret,
yeah, I'll be real quick. My mom and I are on opposite ends of the political spectrum, and we've had a lot of discussions. And what we decided to do, since we're both readers, is choose books for each other that are on opposite ends of the spectrum. We would read the book that the other person recommended, and then we'd have a discussion. So the first ones I found a book called Why the Democrats Are Right and Why the Republicans Are Right, 2 different books. And I sent her the one that was opposite of her, and I read the one opposite of me, and then we had a discussion. During a presidential election, I made her read the book by the one candidate that she opposed, and I read the book by the candidate that I opposed, and then we had a discussion. And that was a nice way of both getting immersed into that other side, but then also talking about it with somebody that I trusted.
Joe and then Wynette.
Well, I don't have anything as interesting as Margaret to say. I've just found that I hold back from trying to teach why they're wrong and I'm right. And that's the first thing I've really learned. And I ask a lot of questions. Partly I have a natural curiosity about people. So I do ask a lot of questions. I make a lot of eye contact, face contact. And I think I show that I'm generally interested in knowing why, just knowing why. And I just work on no judgment at the moment. It's not a time for that until you establish, you get on farther in, you can have deeper conversations. So it's a basic primer that I'm following.
I love that. Thank you. And Wynette, before Donna or I go, please close us out for the night.
Well, I don't know if it's possible for everyone, but we try to invite our Braver Angels Blue friends out to our family farm, and we're organic farmers. And so it kind of, just that in itself kind of breaks the stereotype of most Republicans as being insensitive towards the environment. So getting to know each other's spouses, meeting each other's children, sharing a meal together. I mean, those are not, entirely inventive ideas, but I've certainly found them to work in building bridges across our Braver Angels alliances and friendships.
That's awesome. And I want to fully just advocate for that idea of just like one-on-one conversations, group conversations. I've been in I've been in conversations with Palestinians where we just literally, the topic of the conversation was talking about anything but Israel or Palestine. And we were literally just going, who likes this movie? Or like, we would just like throw out random topics. I don't even remember what we talked about, but that wasn't really the point. The point was just like, talk about anything that's not controversial, get to know each other as a human being. And then like maybe someday we'll get to the hard stuff, you know? And it was super helpful for me to be in on those conversations and be like, yeah, like let's be human beings first, you know? Great. So I'm gonna pass it on to Donna in a moment, but I just want to say that even though we are not going to have a movie in July, as some of y'all may have seen from Donna's latest message, we are actively looking for films to show for August and going forward. So if you have ideas of films, feel free to chat us right now. Feel free to email us. We'll consider them on the film team. And I also want to just flag that we're always looking for people to join in moderating or coming up with films or, you know, doing some of this discussion work together. So if you feel like you want to be a one-time leader, great. If you want to be an ongoing leader, great. And if you have film ideas, we'd love to hear from you. And Donna, I guess, close us out for real.
Yes, thank you, Molly. So first I would like to thank the Braver Angels leaders who helped tonight, Molly being one, obviously, from our film club. I'd also like to thank Melanie Banks for her wonderful research on the making of My Octopus Teacher, and Luke Phillips, who's been working behind the scenes as our Zoom participant manager. So thank you, all three of you. If you have not joined Braver Angels yet, this is a good time. Only costs $12. What a deal. And you would help me support the work that we do. If you like what we're doing here, we do all sorts of amazing things. Just visit our website. You'd be, go to find an event. You'll see all the different events that are going on through Braver Angels. So please join us. And then, as Molly said, we are taking a break next month, but we are always looking for more films to show. So Luke is going to type my email address in the chat box. Feel free to email me with suggestions about films that you think we should be discussing in Braver Angels. And with that, thank you all for participating in our discussion tonight. Thank you for watching that great movie. What a wonderful movie, My Octopus Teacher. And we will see you again. Take care. Bye-bye.